So looking at what we've worked on over the last year, we're in the testing and documentation phase of our next major version of Vernon. So each of those are named after an advancing letter of the alphabet with a New Zealand animal as the code name. So Fantastic Fantail was the next release. So Penny's our lead documentation person. She's writing documentation for the new features as we build them, and then our internal team's testing those as the development's completed. I've given a roundup of features previously that some of you have seen, so I'm just going to quickly run through the most important changes. We're seeing more and more non-social history and natural history collections using Vernon, and so we're getting then pushed to extend the features, particularly for library and archive collections. So for library collections, there's some new fields, an authority-controlled field for marking a series that a particular publication record might link to. So you might be collecting Australian Geographic, and you could create a term for that to link all the records together. And then there's a new field for allocating any call numbers that have been assigned to books. We've extended the bulk update tool to handle bulk deletes. That'll be something that'll be security controlled, so you could lock it down so that maybe only supervisors will have access to do it. And it will also allow what we call conditional deletes, where it maybe only deletes certain rows of information if there's a certain category in that table. So in this example on the screen, I'm deleting all other ID types of a particular other ID category in that second column. And so I'm going to delete the row on a selected group of records if it matches that. So that'll give you a lot of control over cleaning out maybe legacy poor quality data that you're going to be re-entering, or data that was maybe accidentally added to the wrong records by somebody. We've been extending the valuation facilities. So changing all the valuation fields so that they accept cent values, which is becoming more important as people are having to produce collection level totals of the whole valuation, and they're wanting accurate figures that match the accounting records. And then also adding in the ability to record foreign currency values and conversion rates. So you might have purchased an item and you had to purchase it from New Zealand, and you want to record, well, what was the New Zealand price and the conversion at the time we did that purchase. So those changes flow through the whole system. So things like the activities module where you're doing loans and exhibitions, you'll be able to record values with cent entries in as well. We've extended the hosting that we provide for Vernon CMS to allow two-factor authentication. So that's becoming a common security tool where, as well as your username and password, you'll be required to put in a second proof of your identity. And so we're making use of Microsoft Authenticator. That's a phone app where it gives you a temporary 6-digit code, and it knows that you're the person physically holding that phone when you're doing the sign-in as an extra verification. So we've got a couple of our hosted sites that have already switched to that. We've also added more security to Web Messenger. So this is the tool in Vernon that does live updates to the online collection site. So you're in the backend in Vernon editing a record, and it can automatically update the website. But we've added an extra security layer there with username and password, again, to prevent any bad actor connecting to the website and trying to update the information. We've also introduced a monthly billing option for your annual support invoice. So for some sites, it's easier for them to maybe tie that to a credit card, particularly our smaller sites. And so we're offering monthly billing as another way of doing that annual renewal of support. So instead of getting a large bill once a year, you could have a small payment automatic through credit cards every month. And then we continue to gain new clients. So 3 recent ones we've got are Cairns Art Gallery, the City of Kingston, which is a city council that have both art and social history collections, and then a large military collection from the Charles Upham Victoria Cross and Bar Centre. So Charles Upham is a particularly famous military serviceman in New Zealand who's one of the only servicemen to get 2 Victoria Crosses. And so this is a large collection of material related to him and from the surrounding region. And then we've been doing further extensions to a number of our online collection sites. So these are a set of some of the projects that we've worked on. What I'll do is I'll just show you one example of one of those sites, and we can look at some of the features that we've been adding that people have been making use of. So a particularly big online collection revamp that we've been doing is for the Australian Sports Museum. So I'll just click on the link for their site. So we worked with them for about a year to do a huge migration from their legacy library system. They had about 50 or 60,000 library items catalogued, and they wanted to move that into one central system, which was going to be Vernon, so that they could do cross-collection searches behind the scenes and have one single integrated online collection site for the public. So now in the revamped site, they've got highlights from different parts of the collection that can include things like recent library acquisitions. And so if I did a search across the entire collection, so I can just search on this magnifying glass at the top, and it'll bring back everything that's in their entire collection. We can see the current breakdown. So we've got the 50,000 items that used to be catalogued in Vernon for all of their museum collections. They've got the Melbourne Cricket Club, they've got the National Sports Museum, they've got the Olympic collections, but we've now got the 58,000 items in the library collection. They've also started adding topic records. So this is a concept in Vernon where you can create a descriptive record that groups together things of different themes. So if I look at some of the topics they've created one about women's cricket balls, which are a different size, sometimes made by a different manufacturer. And so that particular topic describes the history of those. They have used topic records to present some of the fact sheets that are available for different sports. So one of the things they have are fact sheets for AFL in this case. So there's a couple of topic records for different seasons of AFL. And so this has provided an easy way for fans to get back to these fact sheets about particular parts of an AFL season. This also highlights a change in the browser where we now support PDF records on topic records. So this particular topic record ends up being a landing page where we can see these fact sheets for any of the rounds in 2025 for AFL. So that's provided a way for them to easily group that material and then share it through other places, through their social media platform, for example. If I search for a particular item, they've got one item which I think was sponsored by Castlemaine with their 4X beer. So if I search for 4Xs, I should be able to find different things that have got that name on it. So we can find there's probably some items where they were the sponsor of a game. Here's a book, Cricket 4X Cricket. And so this is a typical library collection item that's now in Vernon. We've got details of when it was published, physical description, some technical detail about the book. In their case, they're creating an object record that represents that title, but they often hold multiple copies. So they're then also creating object records for each of the copies so that they can track things that are specific to each of them. So they might be in different storage locations. And so here where we're showing the copies, that's actually just giving me a summary of the two narrower object records that represent the two copies they have. And we can immediately see that one of them is available in the public library collection location cricket, and one of them's in storage. And then behind the scenes in Vernon, there's full object records that might have condition information or other specific information about one of the copies. And so then if I go back to the home page, the last thing we've done is set up quick links to broad areas of the collection. And so that's an easy way for us to jump straight to the archive records that have been catalogued or straight to the library collection records. And then within each of those collections, we have filters that are specific to that area. So they use the sports keywords on all of the collections, but there'll be some entries for things like object type that are specific to the library. So we might be only interested in the books in their collection, or maybe only the periodicals. So I could filter that down, and I could say I'm only interested in periodicals where we've got an image. And so Wisdom from 2025, we've got a cover image of that particular book. So that's a quick rundown of some of the things we've done as part of that revamp and showcasing some of the features that are available in Vernon Browser now. We've also extended Vernon Browser to support something called the Open Archive Initiative Protocol for Harvesting Metadata. And that's a very, very wordy way of saying a standard method for copying information to some other site that wants to provide easy access to that content. It's most important within Australia because it's what the National Library's Trove website relies on to pull information from all of the different organisations that contribute to that. Trove has tens of millions of collection records, and Vernon's one of the products that contributes collection records to that. So Bendigo Art Gallery is one of the sites that's using this new feature in the browser so that they can contribute their art collection to the Trove website. So if I looked at their Vernon browser site, here's a few items that were made before 1900 that I've searched on. We can see this painting, Returning from Prayer. All of the browser sites are responsive design where it fits the layout that you have. So if you went to a mobile phone, you get a different layout, and we can also easily zoom in and out to change the size to make it suitable to what's easy for you to read. So if I went to the Trove website, I could look for that particular record. So Returning from Prayer was done by George Baxter. Let's have a look for the Trove website. And so this particular standard, Open Archives Initiative, is important because it provides a standardized way for them to connect to a whole lot of different competing software packages. They know that this one method will work for all of the different systems, and that the data that each system will return will also be standardized. So we could look for Prayer, George Baxter, find things in multiple different collections. So one of the large categories of material they have is their newspaper archives, and indeed we can see references to that particular artist in their archives, also in magazines. And then within images, here's the one from Bendigo. So this is the data that has come from Vernon Browser using that standardized method for connecting to it. And one of the things with Trove is that they always link back to the source site. So it's a way of connecting to more visitors. You've shared your material, but ultimately they'll be redirected back to your website. So this link would go back to that record that we were looking before. And so that facility, what we've done is built a new admin section in Vernon Browser that basically does the mapping of what fields you've published to Vernon to that standard set of identifiers in Trove. So we've said, well, the name title field in Vernon is going to go to their title field. The artist field is going to go to their creator field. But it gives us flexibility per individual Vernon client as to how they want their information to be presented on Trove. One feature that we did for one specific client was Sargent Gallery wanted an auto-generated sentence about an artwork. They'd never written descriptions about their individual artworks. They just had basic metadata saying that it was a certain type, it was made in a certain place by a certain artist, but they didn't have any kind of text sentences that the curator had done. So we automatically generated sentences based on that simple metadata. So we took the object type, watercolor, we looked up how many other watercolors were currently available on the website, and then we joined that together with the production place and production date and auto-made the sentence. And the sentence also has clickable links. So if I wanted to see all the watercolors, I could just click on that underlined sentence. So we've made that a generic feature in the browser. So any site that doesn't have kind of simple text descriptions about their objects, we can generate these sentences based on what fields they do have. So joining that together in some kind of natural language to provide an easy to read summary about that particular item. We've seen the example of the topic records where we've got linked PDFs available now. And then we've also got the option now when you create these highlight sets to make them either visible or not visible at any point. So we had quite a few sites where they would have highlight sets that were only relevant at a certain time of year. Maybe it was a set that celebrated a particular annual holiday, or it was for Anzac Day, and they didn't want to recreate that work a year later. So instead, what they would do is show that highlight set on their public site for a week, and then they just hide it, and then they can re-show it again a year later, or maybe just slightly tinker with it and then reuse it. We're also always conscious of security, so we've just introduced compulsory cyber security training internally. And I wanted to highlight that because the resource that we've decided to use is something that's free and might be of use to any of your organisations. The UK government has made a free cybersecurity training course. It's something where you don't need to sign up for it. You just go to the webpage link, and it's got a simple course that takes about half an hour to go through, and it goes through common things you need to think about in terms of internet security. So that's something any organisation could make use of just to improve their skills about how to best protect themselves from modern risks. We're also making use of AI internally to help us be more productive. And I wanted to just show a few of the example cases where we are doing that. Recently, we had a bug where hosted servers were crashing occasionally, maybe once every month or two, because of what would be called a memory leak. Basically, a small bit of memory was being used on the computer and then not being tidied up. And then over time, gradually, all the memory in the computer was getting used up, so the whole thing would crash. And we spent a lot of time trying to find it, and we couldn't see where the issue was. But we described the issue to AI, got it to analyze our code, and then it was able to come back with a half a dozen places where it said, well, all these places, there's potentially a problem. These are places you could review. And we were able to find the bug. So it ended up being a couple of hours of work going back and forth with the AI, whereas we had spent a few weeks leading up to that trying to find the bug ourselves. We're also using it to get assistance with writing formulas and scripts. So we extensively use Microsoft Excel as a middle layer when we're migrating legacy data. So somebody might have thousands of library records in Excel, and we'll use Excel formulas to try and massage that data into a format that will work well within Vernon. And so we've been using AI to write more complex formulas to do more clever things with splitting up and joining data and fixing errors. We're also using it to write what's commonly called boilerplate code. Often when you're writing code, there's almost like a basic template structure that needs to be in place first, kind of connecting to a certain set of data and setting up some initial fields that are going to be displayed on a screen. And we can use AI to generate that kind of really boring basic level of code for our developers to then get a jump start. In the opposite direction, we can get AI to look at our code and just try and make it a bit more consistent. So review where maybe we've done the same thing in 3 different ways, and we should be trying to standardize that. All of that comes with caveats. So these are things that you really need to think of when you're using AI. So these are limitations we've put on ourselves for how we make use of these AI systems. So we only use systems that we've internally agreed on. So we've got an internal wiki page that says these are the AI tools that we've decided are safe and that we understand how they're used, and we understand how they could improve our own processes. We only use the output if we can understand it. So you can get AI to write code for you. That code might all work. It might be more efficient than what you've got. But if you can't understand the code, then it's a potential risk for the longer term. If something goes wrong with your software, you're maybe not going to be able to fix it yourself because you don't really even understand the code that it's written. So we always look at what the output is and understand, well, what is this actually doing? Is it doing what we want it to do? And would we be able to if we had to? We also do human review of all of it, and we do manual human application of anything it does. So the AI work is read only, and then we're taking its suggestions and through a person manually applying that, deciding, well, are all of these things sensible? Are we happy with the scope of the changes that it's deciding to make? And then lastly, we don't use it to generate any creative content. So we'll always look at places where it's still real people creating new interesting things. And an example would be stock photography. Any of the presentations we still use sites that are real photographers where you're paying for use of those stock photos. So things like the speed bumps photo have come from Pixels, which is a place where photographers can load up photos and get small payments for use of those. At last year's user group meeting, I talked about a new product that we've started to build, and that's now well underway. So that product's called Triocular, and it's designed to handle high resolution files and handle the three different kind of key things you have to worry about with those big files. So storing them and managing that file storage, describing those files so that you can find them again and that they're meaningful, and then having ways that you can actually see those files and do things with them. That once files start getting very big, it gets hard to view 100 megabyte TIFF file. And so we've been building a service around the international standard called IIIF. So that's the International Image Interoperability Framework. So that's an international standard for how you work with these kind of files and deal with those three problems. So it's something that's going to be integrated into both of our web products. So into Vernon Browser, so any client that wanted to have super high resolution images, it'll provide a service where those files can then be stored on the web, and you've got a whole interactive way of panning and zooming those high resolution files in an interactive way. And then also within eHive, our standalone product for small museums. We'll also have it available as a completely independent product if there's organizations that just want to solve this problem of storing high resolution images somewhere for use in projects that are nothing to do with Vernon. So that certainly comes up as well, that many of our clients don't have any kind of in-house system for managing those three problems with high-res files. So what it does is it takes in a whole variety of common image and video and sound file formats and then converts them to the standard that IIIF uses. And then it's got a whole lot of software then for allowing you to annotate them with different descriptions and then view them in a web page. As a future phase, we're also investigating possible e-commerce functions. So there might be some things where it is possible for you to charge a fee for people to download a high resolution copy of that. And rather than that being a completely manual process, that might be something that you'd do through our Triocular product. You'd have the high resolution image file there. People might discover it on Vernon Browser. And if it's the right rights category for that item, then maybe they're allowed to make a payment and download a copy of that image after filling in a form. As part of that change, we've also been moving to an international standard method of doing identity and access management. So basically the sign-in part of the application for things like eHive and Vernon Browser. So there's an international product called Keycloak. It's been certified as meeting best practice for security. And it's a way that we can kind of offload the complexity of making sure we're compliant with all different security regulations to some company that's doing already best practice for that. So that's already got tools for properly encrypting passwords, for going all through the right security checks as people do sign in, and allowing people to sign into one location and use different parts of a product that are maybe on different websites or different technologies. We're also upgrading the Vernon side of things. So we've been slowly doing the upgrade to Open Insight 10, which is a new version of the underlying database that Vernon uses. So that's a 64-bit platform, so it runs faster. It can handle larger sizes of images and files. And it's also got some redesigned user interface components. So we can do things like have multi-line rows and tables where you can increase and decrease row sizes just to, on the fly, more easily view information that's nested in one of these tables. And we've got better options for theming things like login pages and for styling data entry forms. So that's a big redesign that's happening in the background at the moment. As well as integrating with the Open Archives Initiative protocol, we've been in discussion with Earthbank. They're similar to Trove. They work in that kind of space, but for geological specimens. So Dean's been helping us, providing us with mineral specimens, and we've been working with the Earthbank developers for automatically harvesting that information from Vernon browser, like we saw with Bendigo for art gallery collections. So again, they've got standard sets of data that they're expecting, and we're providing tools to map the Vernon fields to the fields that they're expecting. There's also a sundry set of enhancements that have been suggested to us that we've given higher priority. So they're the ones we're kind of looking at for the next major release. So List Manager, people want the ability to automatically switch between different views. So by default, you've got your columns in List Manager, but sometimes depending on your workflow on a day, there might be a different set of columns that's useful. Maybe you're doing a conservation project and you want to flip to List Manager Conservation View, where it shows the title, the current condition, the condition keywords, and the date it was last checked. And so you could save different named views and then easily flip between those named subsets of columns. So you could browse the same set of records, but with different information. As the number of records in the person database grows, there's more cases where you've got potential duplicates. So it would be great to have more ways of identifying possible duplicate records by finding names that are similar and giving you hints for merging those records. The bulk location tools, it's more complex to do bulk moves of the boxes. So trying to streamline that to easily work with lists of boxes, for instance. And then there's a restriction table in Vernon where it's fairly basic. You can just say, well, this object's culturally sensitive, or it has a temporary restriction for some reason, but there's no date columns in that table. And we're finding more often people are coming up with restrictions that are date sensitive, maybe only for the next month. You can't do these things with this object because it's about to go on display and you don't want people messing with some particular category. We also are partway through redesigning the deaccession fields. So these are the current fields that get captured when you consider removing an object from the collection. And so we did a series of online workshops. So this is one of the mock-ups that Penny did that we discussed in the workshops. And so we were looking at splitting the deaccessioning information from the disposal if it gets approved, because those are really two different steps. You're deciding whether or not it should be disposed, and then if it is, there's a whole lot of information you want to capture about, well, how did it end up being removed? And then that went through a final iteration where this is the final design we have, where you have the current legal status. So this is an object which has already been deaccessioned. You had a status to say where was it at in that assessment process. So we did decide that it could be deaccessioned. And then we've got two tables, one for who authorized each of those steps. So you can have as many entries as you want saying, well, somebody authorized the disposal, somebody else completed the disposal. And in each of those, you can put in people, positions, dates. And then the disposal table is entirely new, where you're saying, well, now that it went ahead, this is who it went to and what happened with that action. That's the last major piece of development in Fantastic Fantail. So the next release that's coming up very soon will include the deaccession changes.